So welcome everybody to the Fantasy Romance February author panel. My name is Laura Horwood-Benton and I'm the Public Programming and Community Relations Librarian at Portsmouth Public Library in New Hampshire, USA, which I'm saying tonight because I know we have at least one person who's here internationally. So I'm going to start us off this evening with our land acknowledgement. The city of Portsmouth is on the homelands of the Abenaki people who have ongoing cultural and spiritual connections to this area. According to tribal oral tradition, Abenaki people have lived in the place now called New Hampshire for more than 12,000 years since before tribal memory. The Abenaki are part of a larger group of indigenous people who call themselves Wabanaki, or people of the dawn, and form one of many communities connected by a common language family. Here at Portsmouth Public Library, we are committed to acknowledging and honoring the human history tied to this land. Since I know we have people from all over, if you feel like shouting out the indigenous tribes or cultures that are on your land where you are tonight, you can feel free to put that in the chat because we'd love to hear it. If you're curious about our land acknowledgement, particularly if you're local to New Hampshire, you can find that on our website under the About section. If you have questions about library services or upcoming programs, feel free to ask me at the end. We are recording this evening, and when we're all finished, we will be posting it on the library's YouTube account, so that will be up in the next few days, let's say. We have many great online events this month, but in particular, I wanted to let you know about the European Home Front during World War II, which is also an author discussion. Author L Armentrout will discuss her novel, The Vanishing Sky, based on events in her family history, which explores the situation of a rural family in Germany in 1945 as the war winds down. And she'll be joined by Sandel Morse, who will talk about The Spiral Shell, which is his work of nonfiction based on the stories of people who lived the history, chronicling the resistance efforts of a small village in Vichy, France against the German occupiers. Together, both authors will present an engaging look at the lives of ordinary people living in the most challenging circumstances. So if you're interested in that event, that's next week on Thursday, February 18th at 7 p.m. And I will share a link to register in the chat. We love hearing from you about what you'd like to see at the library. So I will also share in the chat an online event feedback form. If you fill it out, you'll not only help the library, you'll also be entered to win a library book bag, but we're not going to mail it to you. So I encourage you to only enter for the drawing if you live locally, but I would still love your feedback even if you don't. So tonight's program has a lot of co-hosts. We are co-hosting with the Rye Public Library, the Kensington Public Library, and with Dover's independent bookstore, A Freethinker's Corner. Chris, who's here tonight, encourages you to check out their website for more information on their local authors program. We are also joined tonight by authors Jennifer Estep, Michelle Diener, and Scarlett St Clair, and our MC, sorry about that, Scarlett, and our MC is author and FaRoFeb founder, HR Harriet Moore. So I'll let Harriet take it away.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for facilitating tonight as well. Really appreciate it. So yeah, I am an author, and I also started a new event called FaRoFeb, Fantasy Romance February. And for those of you who haven't checked out and maybe don't know what FaRoFeb is, it's essentially a month-long celebration of the fantasy romance genre. I find it really frustrating that fantasy romance isn't considered to be more of a kind of proper thing in its own right, even though, you know, fantasy romance books have had huge success and they sell millions of copies, and there's, you know, made some authors and some publishers very wealthy. You know, things like Outlander, Discovery of Witches, and even, you know, Hunger Games, Divergent, Twilight, you know, they're all fantasy romance books. And I started out reading things like Twilight and Divergent, and I loved them, but I wanted something a little bit more adult. I didn't want to read about kids, I wanted to read something with more mature protagonists.
Harriet?
Yes?
So sorry to interrupt you. I'm just thinking that conversation about the mic, I think it's not working because it's quite hard to hear you. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. So I wonder if we could switch. I'm really sorry.
Yes, let me quickly switch. Sorry, technical.
And actually, can I just say that my last name is pronounced Estep and not Estep? I meant to tell you that before we started. I'm so sorry.
I know it's my fault. I apologize. Estep. Thank you, Jennifer.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Technical, it's always a technical difficulty. So I don't know how much you heard what I was saying, but essentially I think fantasy romance is a great genre. I think it's really popular. it sells a lot, and I don't, and so I find it very frustrating that it's not more of a thing, that people don't know about it, and that it's not marketed better than it is today. And I also find it frustrating that when you go into a large bookshop or you look for books online, it's, they're kind of hidden, and you have to really like dig around to find fantasy romance books. So I was like, well, this is annoying, we should do something about it. And I started a month-long event called FaRoFeb, Fantasy Romance February, where every day in February we are spotlighting a different fantasy romance author. And we've got loads of other fun stuff going on as well, including giveaways, and we've got some original content that we've created. I think everyone on this call has contributed to those. And we have all kinds of stuff going on, including author panels and interviews and all of that good stuff. So I definitely encourage you to check out FaRoFeb. And yeah, so we are here tonight as one of the panel events. I'm going to start off just by asking everyone to introduce themselves. So we're going to go around the screen. I don't know if we're all in the same order, but Michelle, why don't we start with you?
Yep. It's lovely to be here. My name's Michelle Diener, and I live in Australia. So I'm coming to you from 7:30 in the morning. I write historical. I started out as a historical fiction author, and then I moved into fantasy romance, and then into science fiction romance, and now I've gone back to adding some fantasy romance to my list of books. I just really love, I think it's the speculative fiction really, which would be fantasy romance and science fiction romance. And I think that there's an element, I'll probably offend some people, but I think there is an element of speculative fiction to historical fiction as well, because we aren't able to physically know exactly how it was. So there's definitely an element of that. So I think the same world building skills come into play in all three genres. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to answering some questions.
Scarlett?
I'm Scarlett St Clair. I'm the author of A Touch of Darkness. I write Greek mythology retellings. I've always been interested in Greek mythology. I went to school to get a bachelor's in English, and predominantly what I studied were epic poems. And so it was a very easy shift for me to move into Greek mythology retellings. That series is what I'm most known for. I have written other books, but yeah, fantasy and romance have always been loves of mine. And when I was a librarian, they were my favorite reader's advisory to give, because I could go on forever about it. So I'm really happy to be here tonight. Thank you.
Jennifer?
My name is Jennifer Estep, and I write pretty much every kind of fantasy. I have an urban fantasy series, my Elemental Assassin series, and then I've also done some YA books and some paranormal romance, and now I'm writing what I call epic fantasy romance. My Crown of Shards trilogy is out now. It's kind of like Gladiator meets Game of Thrones with a kick-butt heroine. And I'll have a new book out in that series this summer. And, I think for me, fantasy romance is just the perfect genre to write, because you can just put a little bit of everything in there: action and adventure and danger, and of course the romance. So those are some of the reasons that I like to write it so much and why I like to read it so much.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think it'd be good for us to talk a little bit to start off with about what fantasy romance actually is, because I don't think it's that clear. For me, fantasy romance is really an umbrella genre, an umbrella term that should encompass lots of different elements. So my view is that it's anything with speculative elements, whatever that's time travel or paranormal, shifters and vampires, or whether that's in an epic world, or whether that's gods and mythology, and I think, but with a significant romantic element. And for me, I wish that the genre was like, that was the overall, and then it was split down into a number of different subcategories, which would help you find specific areas within that. Do you guys, do you disagree? Would you add anything to that? Scarlett, let's start with you.
Oh, I have to come at this from my sort of my past librarian experience, because we had a huge conversation about when new adult became a thing. Do you separate that in a category from romance? And there was a huge group of people who felt like yes, and there's a huge group of people who just felt like new adult was just romance, right? But from my perspective in helping readers and customers, I think it's easier to have those elements in specific categories. I think that what I've seen in the last few years as an author and a librarian is more and more people looking for that particular genre / category. So yeah, I think I would definitely agree with that. The ironic part about what you're saying right now is that we actually took our romance category out of the library and put them all interlaced in the fiction category. So it makes it harder to separate now what is romance from the regular fiction category. So
and that's interesting because that's something that
the irony.
That's something that readers say they find really difficult, you know, and especially people, I think, in the fantasy genre, because, and I've had people kind of, you know, in reader groups say, oh, I had to like really like delve through reviews of books to try and work out, like, is there any romance? Is there not? Like, how does this, you know, because I'm not interested. They're looking for a specific thing that's very hard for them to find.
I think it's hard because cataloging, for instance, is sort of subjective in some ways. It depends on how the cataloger gets the book and where it goes. I think it's kind of the same in bookstores, though. When Twilight became really popular, I don't know if y'all noticed, but they started to differentiate the YA categories a little bit more in the bookstores, and I thought that was really great because you can decide what you want to read based on the category it's in and similarities, right? But the hard part, what you were saying, is there were a lot of books in general fiction that could be put in romance and vice versa. So it was very, very difficult, very weird line to sort of, you know, at what point do you cross it and when do you not? Yeah.
I think we've got a question from Chris.
Yeah, we have a couple questions already started. I'll preface the first one by saying we had this last night with my interview with Sydney Ashcroft. Her publisher wanted to categorize her book, or does categorize her book, as urban fantasy, but she considers it more fantasy romance. It's called Chasing Destiny. What distinguishes fantasy romance from or urban fantasy from fantasy romance? And then the second part is what distinguishes fantasy romance from sci-fi romance?
Michelle, do you want to have a go? You write both?
Yes. I actually once did a whole panel on this, so I can definitely answer it. Urban fantasy is generally set either in the near future or in some alternate future, which is kind of based on Earth, and usually in a city, or I think the best example of that is the Kate Daniels series by Ilona Andrews. I mean, that's or Jennifer's series, The Elemental Assassin. I mean, those are quintessential urban fantasy series, whereas fantasy romance is much more, in my view, I think what Harriet was saying was more broad, general umbrella for the entire, all the genres. Although I must say, when someone says fantasy romance, it does tend to me bring up more epic fantasy romance. But the difference between fantasy romance and science fiction romance is a lot clearer. It's science fiction romance is happening in space, and it's probably a less technical form of straight science fiction. So there's a lot less talk about how big the gun is and how fast the spaceship can go. And there's a much more emphasis on the interpersonal relationships and obviously a romance as well.
Jennifer, do you agree, disagree, and things add?
I do agree. I would say definitely the sci-fi romance, there's more technology. Like Michelle said, you know, it's in space. You have spaceships and you can have like nanobots and laser guns and things like that. But then the romance and the relationship is still a really big part of the story. And it's not like don't want to say so Tom Clancy sci-fi where you're just talking about, like Michelle said, the technical thing of the gun or the ship or whatever. It's more about the relationships. As far as urban fantasy goes, I actually think, like sci-fi romance, urban fantasy is its own thing, because the thing about urban fantasy, it's usually, in first person from the hero or the heroine's point of view, and you can have romance or you cannot have romance. And, some of the urban fantasy series are really heavy on the romance, and then some of them aren't. So to me, urban fantasy and sci-fi are different from what I would call, fantasy romance, because I would agree with Michelle. When I think about fantasy romance, I think more of an epic fantasy, Game of Thrones type of world, or something like Outlander with, time travel, just some fantasy aspect that puts you in a different world than the world that, a more modern world like you would find in an urban fantasy book.
So a question that I had, and I think I presented this to Harriet the other night when we did our interview, was about sci-fi fantasy. So take Star Wars. It's obviously a science fiction movie with all the spaceships, laser guns, all that kind of stuff, but there was a little bit of romance in it between Han and Princess Leia.
All the romance is in badly, though.
yeah. What about, though, the Disney movie WALL-E, where it is science fiction, it's all about the robots and stuff, but WALL-E has this romantic interest in, I don't remember her name, but the white
Eve.
Eve. Yeah. So I mean, that to me, that was present through the whole film. So would that be considered a fantasy romance?
I would. I wouldn't call it a fantasy romance. I would call it maybe a science fiction romance.
I think it's because all of his actions were motivated because of his love for Eve. That's in my head. That's how I reason.
It's one of my favorite movies. I love
cute.
it.
Oh, I do too. No, that was my personal question. So back, we have what was the? Let's see. Where do you see fantasy romance headed in the future?
Bueller.
I think it's a really hard one because I really so what I hope is that publishers start taking it more seriously, booksellers start taking it more seriously, it starts becoming more of a category, and we really start understanding what the subgenres are. So for me, I'd have, paranormal romances, which is pretty well developed as a subgenre. We'll keep developing. And then maybe epic fantasy romance is a subgenre. The likes of Jennifer L Armentrout and Sarah J Maas are doing a pretty good job of elevating the profile of that right now, proving that there is a very significant market. So, hopefully, my hope is that publishers will try and do more in the subgenres and try and really categorize it better. But I don't know, anyone else agree, disagree?
I think it'll become more popular. I mean, you have like, well, it's been out more than a year now, but you have things like The Witcher, which was incredibly popular on Netflix. And I mean, we all know the song, which I will not try to sing. But, I think there's a real market for stories like that. And I think that you'll see more things like that, come out on Netflix and in books and on TV. I mean, you have The Witcher, you have Cursed. I don't know if anybody watched that on Netflix. I really enjoyed that one, which was kind of like a twist on Arthurian legend. And then, of course, you have like all kinds of different TV shows. You have like Once Upon a Time, which was really fantasy and fairy tale romance. So I do think there's a big market for fantasy romance, and I hope that it grows in popularity in coming years.
Have you all seen a boost from Game of Thrones? No?
Like a boost in people being interested
in some sort of, yeah. Or in novels in general, but or in general, just
I think
the genre itself, the fantasy, the romance. I'd never seen Game of Thrones. I'm probably one of the only people in the world who hasn't. So
You're not. I am one, but
all right, so we're two.
I think it's really helpful. I'll give you an example of something that I sort of parallel here, and it will feature Jennifer L Armentrout both times. So when Jennifer L Armentrout, she self-published Wait for You. Some of you may know that novel, but she decided not to go through the traditional route because it was a new adult novel, and that wasn't really a thing at that point. Like, publishers just weren't finding a home for that. They didn't want it. And so she published it, and it was really super popular. And then it opened the door for a lot of other quote unquote new adult novels, even though we don't really use that phrasing because they're trying to push that under. They think new adult is just romance, right? Even though we separate it by ages. And the same thing's kind of happening, I feel, you guys can chime in, but I do feel like, again, that's sort of happening with From Blood and Ash, right? It's sort of shining a spotlight on a lot of other amazing fantasy romance series that have been here for a while. I'm sure there are other authors who've done that, Sarah J Maas, for instance. But I feel as though Sarah J Maas doesn't have the same romantic elements that JLA has. I think her like romance
totally
is heavy on the romance,
disagree.
Right? Well, I think I'm thinking about like the details in it. I guess to me it's kind of different, but anyways, I see that. I think other authors help us sort of pave the way for and have other people interested in us.
And that's kind of a nice segue into my next question, which is around finding an audience. So I heard Dan Brown talk the other day about he brought out his first book, Angels and Demons, and he said no one bought it. And, along came the Da Vinci Code, and now he's, a household name. Everyone knows who he is, sold however many million copies. And then he said, and because of that, Angels and Demons then found an audience, and then that sold really well. And, so how have you guys, so I think fantasy romance needs to find its audience. I think it's finding its audience, and hopefully more people will discover it. But how have you guys found your audience, and what's the journey been like to get there? Jennifer, maybe let's start with you.
Well, my first book came out in 2007, so I've been published for quite a while now, and I have more than, I want to say, 40 books out. And it's kind of like, the more books you have out, the more chances there are for people to discover your work. And I know, especially with my Elemental Assassin series, I'm getting ready to release book 19. And I never would have thought that the series would have gone on this long, but people just keep reading it and reading it and reading it. And like I said, I also think that if you write fantasy or sci-fi or any kind of speculative fiction, if you branch out into, say, I started writing paranormal romance and urban fantasy, and now I've also written young adult and epic fantasy romance. And I think that, writing in sort of like the different fantasy genres has really helped me gain more readers, because if someone likes my voice in the YA book, then maybe they'll pick up one of my urban fantasy books, or if they like the epic fantasy romance, then maybe they'll pick up one of my paranormal romances that I did. So I think it's all about just discoverability, and how to get that discoverability is really, I think, the tricky thing that a lot of authors struggle with.
Is there anything that you found that something happened that really gave you a big lift in terms of discoverability?
I would say for me, it's just, like I said, the Elemental Assassin series, and just kind of how long it's gone on, and people just love the characters so much, and they still buy the books, and I still enjoy writing them. And then, that series has let me branch out and do all these other series. So, yeah, for me, it was kind of the one series that has let me write other series.
Scarlett, you're a bit newer to the game. I know you've been writing for a long time, but your publishing is a bit newer, and your books are really taking off at the moment, which is wonderful. Have the same question to you. What's your journey been like in terms of finding your audience?
So yeah, when I started, I'm self-published, and so when I started, I thought I'm going to make sure that my social media platforms are really geared toward the audience that I want to attract. So I created an aesthetic that I wanted my books to stick to, and that I wanted to stick to, something that really represented me, because I had done this in the past. And I had really focused on creating relationships with authors, but I wanted to attract readers. So the first thing I worked hard on was my social media. I still work really hard on my social media. If you talk to any of my readers, I'm one of the most, I engage like hardcore with them. I will not always be able to do that. It's already overwhelming. But we have a lot of platforms that we connect on. And then as far as how my book started taking off, that was really for my readers. I feel like I write in a niche audience. So I do write Greek mythology retellings, and I think that they're modern Greek mythology retellings, but they're familiar enough that people can connect to those books and those characters. I think that's very important when you're writing, is to write something that's rooted in the familiar. And then things just started happening. Like my Tantor reached out and wanted to publish my audiobooks. And then I was featured in BuzzFeed's 15 like sexy audiobooks or whatever. And that was like a boost. And then I started getting just more and more notice, and it led to deals, and it led to like, you know, I have a call with a literary agent next week. So I had a very backward journey toward that. But all I did is just keep marketing and keep engaging. And, you know, I had some really big wins, just like that BuzzFeed article that blew my mind, you know, so.
Awesome. And Michelle, same question to you.
Well, I started as a historical author with a big New York publisher, and I got this idea for a science fiction novel, and I ended up spending 8 months writing it. And at the end of it, I thought, this is just going to sink me as a writer, because it's completely different. The market for historicals and the market for science fiction is totally different. And I just didn't expect anybody would follow me from historical fiction across to science fiction. But it just, yeah, you know, you can never tell what's going to happen. And the book that I was writing, Dark Horse, just had such a huge, people just loved it. They still, to this day, I get emails telling me they've reread it, you know, 10 times, and it's their favorite book. And just like,
sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, just like Jennifer was saying with her Elemental Assassins, my Class 5 series, which starts with Dark Horse, really let me leap from historical into speculative fiction. And yeah, you can't tell what's going to really connect, you know, with a wider audience. There'll always be readers for your books, but some books obviously just hit that button a bit more with a wider audience, and that was Dark Horse for me. And so since then I've been, yeah, I obviously now have a wide readership that likes speculative fiction. So yeah, it was that book for me that helped me.
And did you have a hard time selling that? Was your agent and
my agent?
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, well, basically what happened was my agent was waiting for a historical book, which I have still half written on my on my hard drive. And anyway, I said to her, look, I actually just couldn't help myself. I wrote this other book instead. And I just realized it was going to take her maybe 6 months, you know, max to sell it. I couldn't sell it to Gallery Books, who was the imprint I was publishing at the time. They don't do speculative fiction. So she was going to have to find a different publisher or a different imprint. And then after that, it would be another 18 months before it would come out. So we're looking at 2 years, you know, and I just decided that's just too long. I can't be without a book out for 2 years, which is, you know, just standard industry times.
And so you
I self-published it, yes, and I I never look back. I think Jennifer and I had a few chats about that.
We did.
Yes,
And you know,
yes.
it's funny because I have almost forgotten that you wrote historical fiction. When I think about your books now, I think
Yes.
about Dark Horse and your sci-fi series.
Yeah.
And so you both of you have been traditionally published and also have self-published. So
Yes.
how do you find that balance? And I know, Jennifer, you're still both, and I don't know, Michelle, are you still both as well, or are you now entirely?
Well, I'm still with Simon & Schuster's. My books are still available, but I've stopped submitting to traditional publishers now. It's not worth it for me. It's definitely, once you've created your ecosystem of your designers and you've got your setup, it's definitely financially more beneficial to self-publish. So that's what I do.
Jennifer, so you're still doing both. You know, that's obviously a different balance for you. How do you find that?
I'm very busy all the time. You know, any author will tell you, whether they're traditionally published or self-published, there is always something to do, whether it's actually writing the book or editing or revising or working on your social media or your website or your newsletter. You know, there are things that I like about traditional publishing and there are things that I like about self-publishing. Kind of for me, the traditional publishing still comes first, but then like Michelle was saying about, you know, the long gap in between the traditionally published books, you know, with self-publishing, well, like I have a new book out in March that I'm self-publishing, and then I'll have another traditionally published book out in July. And then, you know, I'm hoping to maybe self-publish a novella or a short story sometime this fall. So for me, doing the traditional and the self-publishing is a way to have more books out on a more consistent basis. So
Michelle and Jennifer, is one of the reasons you went self-publishing for this time around, is it COVID related because of the long wait times with the traditional publishers? And the reason I ask is we have a lot of local authors here who have tried the traditional publishing route, but they're pushed out to 2022, 23, 24. And they believe that, or they've been told that it's because COVID has backed up the major publishers. Is that one of the reasons why you pushed back yours? And Scarlett, to you, is that why you are self-publishing, because of the long wait times?
Well, my long wait time was long before COVID. So it does take 18 months from, you know, acceptance of manuscript to publishing usually. And if it's a new work, which is in a different genre, which mine was at that time, it would have meant my agent would have had to have gone to find a new editor. Because while I had a great editor at Gallery Books, she was interested in my historicals. So I would have had to have found a completely different, you know, publisher. So for me, it wasn't just a normal run of business, you know, a 2-year period. And I think my understanding with COVID is that there's paper shortages and there's various other things. So it will be even longer now. So yeah, it makes self-publishing more and more, you know,
necessary.
Healing.
Yeah.
Lucrative.
You can't earn a living if you're not publishing. So
yeah, totally. And I wonder whether that is going to really change the dynamic of the publishing industry. And it must already be, because, you know, a lot of books don't make money, traditionally published books as well as self-published books. You know, a lot of publishing houses have relied, my understanding is, historically on those kind of bigger authors who, you know, maybe produce a lot of revenue and then they kind of prop up everybody else. And I think that it seems like there's this kind of movement of more established authors then deciding, well, actually, hang on a minute, I've got an audience, I know how to write books, I want to be more published more frequently, I can just do it myself. And so I wonder how much the publishing houses are losing those established authors. And I know there are other smaller presses who are sort of skimming some of the maybe better known authors off the top as well. So I don't know, have you guys felt any of that so far in terms of traditionally publishing, squeezing them even more than they've already been squeezed?
Well, I don't know about that. I will say I can write faster than I can be traditionally published, if that makes sense. Well, I can. I mean, I can.
Yeah, I believe you. I believe you completely.
I mean, you know, I've been writing 2 or 3 or more books a year for several years now. And, you know, with traditional publishing, depending on kind of what genre it is, you know, some traditional publishers only want 1 book a year. I will say the romance genre, they do like to publish people quicker because they know that romance readers have such a voracious appetite for new books. But even with my epic fantasy romance, you know, there's a pretty big gap in between each book. I think it's about 8 or 9 months. So like I said, I do the self-publishing to kind of fill in the gaps between when I have new releases.
Okay,
I
so
have a little bit.
go on.
Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
No, I just have a little bit of a different experience since I did this the reverse way. But when I was querying some agents, because I got some questions about rights, and I was like, well, I don't know what to do with this, so I think I'm going to need an agent because it's kind of it's a big deal. And this one agent was like, well, you're not going to make what you make self-publishing. Like, there's no way you can get that kind of money via traditional publishing. And so obviously then you're kind of like, well, why would I do it then? Like, what? So the only reason I'm interested in having an agent is for subsidiary rights. Even though I've sold to a couple of foreign publishers and my audio rights, I still feel like potentially I will need an agent for the others. So I thought that was really interesting. I think in some cases it is more lucrative for us to maintain our self-publishing platform because there's no way, I don't think there is a way they can match what I make. So that's my perspective.
yeah, which is really, and that's kind of interesting because then so I know traditionally as well, publishers have then said, oh, who's doing well self-publishing? Maybe we'll have you now, you're proven. And I guess if it's less lucrative for authors to do that and it doesn't make any sense, then that's again interesting. I'm just really interested in market dynamics. So my background is in kind of change and innovation and starting and setting up new things alongside writing. And actually I find it nice segue into my next question. So I actually find that kind of stuff, that change and innovation and program managing things, it seems like it would be very separate, but actually it's really helpful for writing because I'm a planner. It would shock you all to know, and but also having that kind of creativity of, okay, well, I need to get from A to B. I need, like, we want to create this new thing. How are we going to do it? How do we get from here to there? Which is actually, I find really helpful for writing books, and I plan books, obviously. So, I find those skills really transferable. Scarlett, you've already said you are a librarian, so your skills are must be. So maybe we'll start with you. How have you found your skills kind of transfer from your old life? And I guess Jennifer and Michelle, I don't know if you had an old life or if you just started creating an author, but we'll get to that in a second.
An old life.
Old life. Like, I feel like it's like a life before and a life after.
I just love that description. Tell us what you took from your old life as a spy.
Previous skills that now apply.
I was actually a publisher. I started as an editor, and then I became a publisher at an academic and professional publishing house. So it wasn't fiction. I was in the law division, law publishing, but yeah, that was invaluable to me. Obviously, I got into publishing because I always wanted to be a writer. So, but yes, I've never regretted that, and the editing either. So, and then I went into IT after that. I managed a small IT firm for a few years, but my background definitely helped me. And particularly in self-publishing. I mean, for traditional publishing as well, I always felt like when I dealt with my editor and my publisher, I really understood, what was going on in the background. And so I wasn't as nervous, maybe a newly published author as some people, and I wasn't overwhelmed by it, but because I'd sat on the other side of the chair. But yeah, it definitely helped me.
Jennifer, how about you? Did you have a career before being an author?
I did. So I have a bachelor's in English and journalism and a master's degree in professional communication. And I worked for a daily newspaper for more than 10 years. So, you know, I did a variety of jobs. I was like a general assignment reporter for a while. And then I moved over to the features department and did some copy editing and some page design and layout. So it was very helpful. You know, sometimes I would have 15 minutes to write a story. So that kind of trained me how to just kind of sit down and write quickly and, you know, just write to the end and then go back and edit it. And the other interesting thing about working at a newspaper were the nasty phone calls and emails that you would get. I would literally we would have people, like if there was something wrong with the crossword puzzle in the newspaper, we would get, you know, a couple of hundred calls by 8 o'clock in the morning complaining about why is the crossword puzzle wrong. And I remember one time a guy called me up on the phone and told me that I needed to take a good English class because I did not know how to write. So I will say all the nastiness at the newspaper has helped me deal with, you know, as an author, you're going to get some of those nasty comments too. So that definitely helped me kind of learn how to deal with the negativity that comes along with being an author.
I can imagine. Sounds terrible. Also, like 200 people to care that much about the crossword. I mean, I get it. My grandmother, she did the crossword every day. She was like, it was like an integral part of her life. So, yes. I mean, I get it. I mean, still. Scarlett, how about you? I mean, obviously applicable. What were the main applicable things that you found?
I managed people in my job. I managed a group of librarians. So that's been very helpful in taking on an assistant because I know what I need and I know how to communicate to that assistant. And that's not something you really think about, but I was like, how do I communicate what I need from you? And yeah, so that was very helpful. But you know, as a librarian, I'm a researcher, and the other part, I understand how people consume information, and I understand that people are very user generated, so they are driven toward other people's recommendations, their friends' recommendations. So I just really understood the importance of that in creating community, and I think that was really applicable, and that's what I set out to do when I started my journey to self-publishing, is to create that community upon which I would sort of build my readership.
Yeah, I mean, must do. And I think that's really key. And actually that's something I've learned from, and like understanding niches, I think as well is really important. And I think I've learned that from my Instagram account. You know, building up an Instagram account is one thing, but it's a very different kettle of fish if you've got 10,000 followers who absolutely adore your work and will buy everything that you put out in the world versus 10,000 people who are kind of like showing you a pretty book picture. You know, it's a different, and I think understanding that is really important for anyone book marketing. Going to move on to talk about inspiration. So I'm sure you all can too, you know, find inspiration everywhere. I really find just world events really inspiring. So even things like climate change or energy consumption, or, you know, all of those kind of big crises that we're facing, really inspiring and really interesting, and things that I really like to tie into the plots and into my worlds. What do you find most inspiring, if there is such a thing, or, you know, how do you find inspiration for your books? Who should start with? Scarlett, let's start with you.
I take predominantly from women's rights at the moment, and A Touch of Ruin. I really made a connection between Apollo and his relentless pursuit of women who did not want him, and Harvey Weinstein. So I just try to kind of connect what current events were still happening in ancient times and play upon those. I like to try and kind of change that narrative and make it more empowering for women. So that's kind of where my focus is.
The end. I am done.
I will say I don't know that I take from current events all the time. I will tell you, I watch way too much TV and movies, so I'm all about the pop culture. And kind of one of the things that I kind of remember from when I was a kid was when I want to say Return of the Jedi came back, the third original Star Wars movies. And I always kind of wondered why Leia didn't get to be a Jedi and didn't get to go fight the Emperor with Luke. And so I kind of think that, in my books, I'm kind of, the women are the heroes, and they do, get to pick up the sword and go fight the bad guys and save the day. And that's just kind of what I like to read and write. And I kind of think that not seeing so much of it when I was a kid and some of the big pop culture things like Star Wars made me want to write my own stories and, tell the story that I wanted to tell. So.
Michelle?
Harriet, like you, I'm a huge consumer of politics and news and the big stories, which I definitely find I weave that kind of thing into my books, particularly my science fiction. But when I was growing up, I still am a voracious reader, but I was really a voracious reader, and as a teenager, and I was always so disappointed. I think, as Jennifer just said, so many of the books were male-centered. The woman was seen through the male gaze. I couldn't see myself there. I was just confused and disappointed as to why the female characters didn't get the same fun and agency. So I like reading about women with agency and the ability to shape not just their lives but the world around them. And so that's the kind of thing I like to write. And I sense a theme here, and I wonder whether fantasy romance is actually just the kind of natural progression of fantasy with women writers.
And I think that's a really interesting point, which we can talk about in a minute, because Chris has a question.
I do. So this is for all of you. What was the first fantasy romance you remember reading? And to add on to that, did you take inspiration from those first, or did it influence your writing from those first fantasy romances that you read?
You want to start?
Anyone? Scarlett.
I'm trying to remember, so Jennifer,
me too.
take it away.
Well, I remember when I first got into fantasy in high school, I read more like the traditional male epic fantasy by like David Eddings and Terry Brooks and Tolkien and that sort of thing. But one of the first, what I would say, more fantasy romances that I remember reading is Beauty by Robin Mckinley, which is a fabulous book. It's one of my all-time favorite books. And it's a retelling of the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale, but it is from Beauty's point of view. And like Michelle says, she does have that agency in the book where, she's trying to save her family and she's trying to save the beast and all this other stuff. And it's a really lovely book. The writing is so elegant, and it's a fantastic book.
I think that must have been one of my first ones that I remember as well. I think I read a lot of Robin McKenzie, yeah.
Did any of these influence your writing, or did they give you just inspiration to start writing?
I think at that point I was pretty much wanting to be a writer, but for me, one of the attractions was the fairy tale element of her work. And I had always been such a fan of fairy tales, and my straight fantasy, I have a new fantasy series out, which isn't based on fairy tales, but my previous fantasy work is all fairy tale retellings. And I think that that's part of the attraction. Yeah.
So there's a comment. I'm sorry, go ahead.
What, Scarlett, what was your answer?
I don't remember. I'm pretty sure I remember reading like Rhapsody, I think by Elizabeth Hayden, and that was the first heroine who was pretty kick-ass, and she but I was like Jennifer, and I started out reading all like the male-centered stuff, like Lord of the Rings is what inspired me to write. But I'm pretty sure Elizabeth Hayden was the first one who wrote a female in fantasy who was just a really awesome character. And Mercedes Lackey, I was really big on her.
It's really interesting. I read a lot of Wilbur Smith. Have you read any Wilbur Smith? You know what I mean?
I know the name
big
from the library.
I grew up in South Africa, so
you definitely. and I find it's when I was thinking about fantasy romance, actually a lot of his books are basically just fantasy romance. But I mean, no one would ever sell them like that because he's very male author, and that he has a much wider readership. And his Egyptian series particularly is set in ancient Egypt. It's basically a love story all the way through. That's one of the main central themes, and there's magic. So I'm like, this is essentially a fantasy romance. And I think those kind of books have really influenced me in terms of action, adventure, mystery, lots of stuff going on at the same time, as also having the romance. But I think to return to what you were talking about earlier, Michelle, that kind of natural evolution, I think it's almost evolving. My view is it's evolving almost from two ways. So it's evolving up from YA fantasy, where obviously the protagonist is just the younger, and also from kind of male-dominated, male-written fantasy. And so it'd be interesting to hear everyone's thoughts on that in terms of how much do we think it's changing? Do we think it's going to keep going? What do we think might happen?
Well, I don't think that as I think Jennifer mentioned before, romance readers are voracious readers. They really love reading. They'll read 3 books a week easily, and once they get to know and love fantasy romance, I just think they'll continue to demand more fantasy romance. So it's just, and particularly people who've enjoyed fantasy before but felt that lack of female agency will find it in fantasy romance. And so I mean, I think that's a bright future for the genre, because the readers that we're appealing to are readers who will just devour whatever they can. So
do you so I was talking to a friend about this the other day, and she said, oh well, it almost needs like a rebranding, because like fantasy, she was talking to some friends about FaRoFeb, and they were like, oh, not sure about fantasy romance, that sounds a bit like something I wouldn't like. And then she said, well, did you like Twilight? They were like, yeah, love Twilight. And then they were like, do you like Outlander? Absolutely, sign me up. And it's like, it's almost like that kind of branding almost is kind of wrong at the moment. So I don't know, do you guys have any better way that you've described it rather than as fantasy romance? No.
I don't just put it in one category or the other, but we do have, in librarianship, we have a conversation all the time about jargon, right? Because if you use the jargon, people aren't going to know what you do. They probably don't care, honestly. We talk about new adult. Well, no one knows what that is. They just know they've read a book that they like, right? By an author that they like. So I think sometimes I think even with rebranding under a word, it's kind of difficult. But I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Of course, please do.
Sometimes I feel like romance is sort of a genre that's made fun of all the time. Anytime I tell people that I'm a romance author or I'm a female, the first thing they go is, oh, you write romance then, ha ha ha. And I'm like, yeah, I do. It's great. It's a great genre. Well, so I almost feel like it's almost removing that stigma of, oh, ha ha ha, you write romance. Like, and then we have a tendency, even with Twilight, I love Twilight, but we have a tendency to demonize those works and make fun of them. Anything that gets really popular that's romance is always like made fun of. So I don't know, what's your take on that? I mean, do you guys feel that pressure to sort of like break out of this kind of mold we're all put in as fantasy, like romance as romance authors, right? And then fantasy authors, right? And I think when you combine the two, people are like, but it's romance,
well,
you know.
Romance has always come in for ridicule, and that's because we live in a misogynist society. I mean, it's by women, it's for women. Most of the people
makes a fortune.
It makes a fortune.
It does.
I was reading that Bridgerton on Netflix is now their biggest series that they've ever had. Romance has carried the rest of publishing for maybe the last 30, 40 years. So, you know, you just have to ignore them, because it's almost everybody in who disparages romance has never read any of it. And, you know, what are you going to do with that kind of
well, I think the other thing
it's
is
just, yeah.
The other thing I sometimes think is they have read it, but they don't really realise that they've read it, or they might have read, like, they can't kind of put their finger on why they like some books, like Where the Crawdads Sing, biggest book of the last how many years, still got a love story in it. You know, it's like, that's got to be some of the reason why it was so successful.
And I mean, you look at like an author like Nicholas Sparks. I mean, how many millions of books has he sold? Nobody is like disparaging him for writing romance that I know of.
He's a man.
Yeah, probably because he's a man, and but his books don't even have happy endings because somebody almost always dies at the end. So,
well, he does that deliberately so that he doesn't get the romance label, I think.
And then, you know, I've heard other authors, these superstar authors who are like, oh no, I don't write romance, and it's like, yes, you do. There's a romance in your book. And I think it's so sad that there's this stigma attached to it, because, you know, some of the best writing today is being done in romance books. And, you know, I feel sad for all the people that don't want to pick up a romance book because they're missing out on a lot of great stories.
Do you guys remember when like ebooks got so popular, and it was because people could finally read romance, but secretively on their Kindles?
Yes. On the train or whatever. Yes.
And Chris and I were talking about this the other day in terms of like bookshops. It must be a real issue for bookshops. I mean, people, like, why aren't people buying the romances in bookshops? It's like, because they're embarrassed. So, you know, it's easier to go online and just like buy it. No one can judge you, no one can see you. And, you know, so I think that's quite an interesting conversation maybe for another time. But
that's what I was going to say was when Midnight Sun came out, we had a few people come in and say, this is kind of my guilty pleasure, kind of don't tell anybody I'm buying this type of thing. But Twilight, I have issues with Twilight, but I did read it, not realizing, this is my point, is not realizing that it was fantasy romance. Laurel K. Hamilton, I loved at least the first half a dozen plus of her Anita Blake series, not realizing that that's, I guess, could be considered a fantasy romance. What about Sarah Kozloff and her 9 Realms? I don't know if you've heard any of those ones. The first one's A Queen in Hiding. I read that one, and that's definitely fantasy with the romance in it. I don't know if it's considered that or not, but for me, it's not understanding or knowing that this subgenre or this genre exists. Not only as a reader, but also as a bookseller.
I will say I kind of hate the term guilty pleasure. I mean, people should just read what they like to read and, you know, be proud about it. And if somebody doesn't like what you read, well, too bad for them. I mean, that's kind of my perspective.
No one is holding them down and forcing them to read it.
I know.
You know,
and
just
no
let everybody
librarian
enjoy what they enjoy.
Yeah. I mean, no librarian or bookseller is going to judge you for what you read. That's not what we're there for. We're there to get books in your hands, right? Like,
yep.
But I think the point kind of Chris is making as well is that people don't even realize it's a genre. You know, they're like, they don't even know to come in and ask for it because they're like, they don't know that it's a thing that they should ask for. So I almost think that there's
I think I said this to Harriet, was when I think romance, I think of Fabio on a white horse, you know, galloping along the beach with a woman with a little, you know, big,
except that was 40
dress.
years ago.
And Fabio.
But that's who's Fabio.
I know that the whole term goddess ripper. I mean, it's just the lazy journalists who basically regurgitate that same Fabio bodice ripper story, usually every February. I think that there was a particularly bad take on Slate the other day. Yeah, basically, it's just really lazy journalism that doesn't move on.
Do you think people's perspectives of romance are finally starting to change?
Hang on, Jennifer was just going to say something. Okay. Just hold that thought for 1 sec.
You were talking about bodice rippers. I got an email, I'd say about 2 weeks ago. Somebody sent me their review that they had left on Goodreads about one of my books, and they used the word bodice ripper in it. And I was kind of like, you know what? I have finally arrived as a romance author. Somebody has called my book a bodice ripper. So I was kind of proud of that.
But it's funny, like, because even like contemporary romance, you know, like the newer wave, I guess, of contemporary romance, things like The Hating Game and, you know, the stuff that Christina Lauren writes, and like they've got smart women who, you know, protagonists. It's not just about kind of someone sitting around pining after a man, you know. It's like there's a lot of interesting things that happen. There are a lot of kind of world issues that they talk about. It's cleverly written, it's funny, you know, and I think it just, I agree, it's like lazy journalism, and probably not enough people campaigning to say, come on, right, this, your writing no longer resonates with me, and I think that you need to change it.
You know,
a lot of people have said that about that Slate article.
And it's like, how do, so this is something that I'm interested in for, you know, partly as FaRoFeb, but like, how do those things get amplified? You know, so I almost feel like fantasy romance needs like a campaign to booksellers and to publishers to be like, and to the press, be like, okay, hi, this is a thing that is legitimate, that makes loads of money, that you should care more about than you do, and you should write about in a different way than you do. And I don't, you know, I don't know how authors kind of go about doing that and readers go about doing that. So if anyone has, I
think this is one perfect way to do it, is having this FaRoFeb or something like that, and including definitely libraries and local booksellers, because, you know, we're the ones who are, yeah, anybody can go on any platform to buy a book, but we're the ones who are really gonna, the librarians and the booksellers are gonna hand sell, talk up these books, especially if, you know, we can read them, which we do. We get you know, advanced readers copies from the publishers, or if you're self-pub, bring them in, or, you know, let us know about them so we can get them, and then we hand sell them.
And I feel like we should go light. We've gone heavy into the publishing. So someone has just asked a question to say, what do you read for fun? Jennifer, let's start with you.
I will read just about anything for fun. Pretty much the only two genres that I don't read for fun are literary fiction, because it's dark and depressing and then everybody dies at the end. And I don't read a lot of nonfiction either, but it's so funny. Scarlett was talking about Jennifer Armentrout. I'm actually reading From Blood and Ash right now. And then I'm really looking forward to A Court of Silver Flames by J Maas that comes out next week. Let's see, some other series that I've enjoyed recently. I really like the Consortium Rebellion series by Jessie Mahalik. That is sci-fi romance. And then I have like a ton of rom-coms on my TBR pile, and I also really like to read comics and graphic novels, so I read a little bit of everything.
Michelle, how about you?
I, like Jennifer, I read, you know, across the board. I'm not that fond of horror, and I think it's my imagination. I just scare myself too much. And I don't read a lot of nonfiction, although I do have Michelle Obama's Becoming waiting for me to read. Otherwise, I'll read everything. I really love kind of detective fiction or mysteries, and yeah, fantasy, sci-fi, yeah, across the board.
Scarlett, how about you?
Yeah, I read a lot of Highland and Regency romance. I read Jennifer L Armentrout and Laura Thalassa. I love her. Promise of Fire was one of my most recent favorites. So if you haven't checked out, I always say her name wrong. Amanda Boucher. I love her.
Another FaRoFeb author. Great.
Yeah. Yes. My favorite thing to do is get on Overdrive and just search until I find a random book that I've never heard of before. And so that introduces me to new authors, because there's some really, really good books on Overdrive and Hoopla that I've never heard of before. So
can you just say what that is? Because I hope everyone here knows, but it changed my life when I found out about it.
Overdrive is free ebooks basically from your library. So hopefully they have a subscription to it at your library. And they also have like audiobooks, and sometimes they have like movies on there. Hoopla is really awesome because it's simultaneous use. So whereas you would have a certain limit on the books you could check out on Overdrive, like the library would only subscribe to certain license. So they only have like 3 ebook copies, which sounds really weird because they're ebooks, but it's a thing. But Hoopla, you could check out, like everyone can check out all the same book, and it's chill, right? But it's all free through your library with your library card. So big, awesome thing that people don't know about.
Yeah, and like it's surprising how many people, and even on like Bookstagrammers, who are like reading, you know, hundreds of books a year, and they're still discovering it. And I just, you know, so if anyone hasn't checked out yet, you definitely should.
That's my go-to.
Yeah, same. And I also find that I read loads of stuff on there that I maybe otherwise wouldn't pick up or wouldn't go and buy.
Right.
You know, loads of like non-fiction stuff that I like, oh, I'll give it a listen. And then loads of free audiobooks. Anyway, moving on. What about COVID? So everyone's talking about how bad COVID is, which obviously it is terrible. What have you found that has got better in the publishing, authoring, connecting with fans, anything world since COVID started?
I will say just all the Zoom meetings online, like this one tonight. I mean, before the pandemic, you know, I had never done a Zoom meeting, and now I've done several of them. And, you know, this is for a library in New Hampshire, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's like, I probably would never be able to travel to New Hampshire to do a library talk. But I will say that the one good thing about the pandemic is just, you know, being able to connect with people all over the world with Zoom meetings now.
Mm-hmm.
Scarlett, Michelle, anything else?
I mean, I'm part of Romance Writers of Australia, and I was on the committee for a conference that we were organizing last year, which had to be cancelled because obviously no one could come to it, and particularly in my state, which wasn't allowing anyone in. And we had it all online, and we had more people attending than in any year, you know, but by maybe 100% more people were able to attend because it was all online. So yeah, that has been good.
Accessibility just increased by like tenfold because of COVID. I think that's why I got so popular. I think people were bored and looking for something to read, and I think
they saw your pretty covers and were like, yes.
Yeah, and they were like, yes. I partially attribute COVID for my success.
But you have to write really good books too.
That's fair, yes.
Which you do.
Yeah, you definitely do. And yeah, I agree. I think like and even things like FaRoFeb, I think people are, you know, interested in coming to do this kind of stuff as well, even more now, because obviously they can't go to book conventions and do all the normal stuff. So I agree. I think there have been lots of positive impacts. What is your favorite trope, fantasy romance trope? Who wants to go first?
Enemies to lovers. That's my favorite.
Enemies.
Ask someone else while I formulate mine.
Well, I have several different tropes that I like. I love like the fake dating, fake relationship that turns real. I love like a marriage of convenience. But I would say my favorite is enemies to lovers. Like Raylo. I'm a huge Raylo fan. Like,
yes.
Are you one too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I was so mad at the end of the third movie. It's like 1 second of happiness, and then like, what are you doing?
I know.
And
I'm whole story planned out for this.
But, you know, just anything. I think I like enemies to lovers. It's just because you take these two people who absolutely hate each other and yet they somehow fall in love anyway. I love that trope.
I think probably the one I use the most is forced proximity. So, you know, they get thrown together and they have to get to know each other and learn to trust each other. Yeah.
And there's only one bed.
There's only one bed and only one horse. And only one
horse. There's only one horse. Does it get any better?
That's right.
Which you can only really do in fantasy romance. I feel like if you did it in normal romance, it'd be like, guys, come on.
Oh no, I remember
when you're
reading.
Escaping, there's only one horse.
No, I remember reading some old school historical romance. I don't know which one it is, but there's a horse and there's things that happen on the horse.
Historical, I get historical. Contemporary. Can they do it? Could you do it? You probably could, but I'm yet to see it. So we've got some questions that we had from Instagram. So if you could have written any other book out there in the world, which one would it be and why? Jennifer, start with you.
What book has made the most money ever? Because that's the one that I want to write.
It's got to be Harry Potter, isn't it?
Probably, but I don't know that I want to write that one now. I will say I will go back to Beauty by Robin Mckinley because I think it's such a lovely book.
I think if I'm going to choose one, it's probably something I probably wouldn't really be able to write, and that is like a Terry Pratchett with just the laugh out loud funniness of it. I do try to put humor in my books, but I don't think I would. You know, he's really funny. He's special.
Uprooted by Naomi Novik, because I don't know if you guys have read it, but she writes the most beautiful magic I've ever read in my entire life.
That's amazing. I don't know what my answer is to that question. Luckily, Chris is here to save the day.
The Kensington Public Library would like to know, or is interested in, why you make more on self-published books than traditional books.
Depends on who you are, first of all.
Well, I definitely make more because my publisher gives me a percentage of sales on every sale, and when I self-publish, that amount is maybe 5 times more per sale for me than if my book is sold through them. So it's plain and simple the percentage that you get per sale. So when you're with a traditional publisher, you're handing over the work of the cover and the formatting and the editing and the sales channel to them, but you're paying them a hefty percentage of each sale for that privilege. And when you self-publish, you pay someone one-off for the cover, for the editing. It's not a continual cost to you per sale. It's just a once-off fee, and then you're making 4 or 5 times more per sale. So,
and I guess it's something in the order of, I think you don't have to say how much you get contractually, but I think it's something in the order of like 10% you would get for a traditional deal, of which you have, and after that you have to pay your agent some money, versus you get to keep like 70% of the royalties. Sorry,
okay, pretend like I'm Steve Kornacki and there's like a whiteboard full of math in here. Say you have like a $7.99 paperback book. Well, you sell a print copy of that book, you're going to get about, I want to say 64 cents per print copy. And maybe like $1 for the ebook. But, if you self-publish that $7.99 book, you're going to get like $4 or $5 for each e-copy that you sell. So yeah, I mean, you can basically sell less books self-publishing and make the same amount of money that you would with a traditional contract. And like if you have a long running series, you know, and you do advertising like things on BookBub, where say you drop the first book in your series to 99 cents, you can sell thousands of copies. And, you know, if once you get somebody hooked on your series, you know, hopefully they'll read the rest of your series. So it's just kind of like a cumulative effect, like Michelle said, you know, over time, you pay for everything up front, but then you can just keep earning money and money and money and money and money as long as the book keeps selling.
And I would say the caveat to that is obviously you have to find your audience in the first place. So, you know, I think if you're an established author and you know how to do it, or, you know, or you're just really good at marketing and write really good books like Scarlett, then I think there's, you know, there you have to kind of, it's a bit of an equation to work out. So I think for some people, it would probably maybe be better to go down the traditional route to get more of a name, to have some legitimacy, to then, you know, jump to the other side. I think it does depend.
I think that's changing a bit though. I mean, when self-publishing first started, it was definitely looked down on. But now I think it's seen as a valid choice, particularly because it isn't like you can go down the traditional publishing route or the self-publishing route. Quite often you can't go down the traditional publishing route. I mean, there are a lot of barriers to entry. And so it's not like an equal equation. But I mean, when I was first published, there was no such thing as self-publishing really. The Amazon had not started Kindle, and the only way you could get in was, you know, through an agent into a big publisher. And in those days, I think there was the big six or something. Now there's 4. And my publisher, Simon & Schuster, is about to be bought by Penguin Random, so it's going to be 3. So yeah.
And I think the other thing is that some people don't realize is that self-published authors who are on the Kindle Unlimited, so they part of KDP Select is what it's called, they also earn money for the page reads that they get from Kindle Unlimited. So there's like a convoluted algorithm in the background that works out what a page read is. But actually a lot of authors make huge amounts of money that way as well through Kindle Unlimited, and again they get to keep all of that money rather than having to share that with anyone. So
although you have to pay taxes.
Yeah.
So that sucks, but
oh, that self-employment tax really sucks. Yeah. I will say though that like I get so many comments, it's like, oh, it must be so easy to write a book, and it's like, no, it is not easy to write a book, and self-publishing is a lot of freaking work. I mean, I enjoy doing it, but it's a lot of work, and it is not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah.
What you like, you know, I self-published because I do like to, I didn't even consider traditional publishing for A Touch of Darkness. But what you choose to control, right? You have control over your cover, how you edit your book, a lot of those elements, you give up a lot of time in exchange for that. So it is constant work. I didn't think, I worked full-time for a long time while I self-published, and I thought, oh, I'll have so much time when I write full-time, and that was a lie.
The hardest
I don't know how I did it.
Had.
It's like never ending, you know, it's like, because you could always do something else. It's not, you know. Okay, we're going
growing.
We're going to do a quick fire round. Okay. We're going to go round in a circle, Michelle, then Jennifer, then Scarlett, because that's the way you are on my screen. What are you reading right now, Michelle?
Reading Faithless by J.D. Robb.
Jennifer?
I am reading From Blood and Ash by Jennifer Armentrout.
Good choice.
Oh my gosh, I'm looking at my Kindle. I'm sorry. I just finished Black Knight by Rena Kent, I think.
And I'm actually reading The Turncoat King by Michelle. So, what are you watching right now, Michelle?
I'm watching Endeavour, which is the BBC Young Morse series. It's really good.
That's good. Check it out. Jennifer?
I just finished binging out Lupin on Netflix, which is about a gentleman thief. It's really cool, and I'm really enjoying season 2 of Nancy Drew.
Aww. I watch true crime, so I'm watching A Time to Kill.
Take it dark. I'm watching The Mandalorian, which I'm not that happy about. It's my husband's choice, and I'm not enjoying it. But
don't like The Mandalorian?
I loved it.
It just has a storyline. It doesn't have a storyline. Baby Yoda's really cute.
Maybe that's what carries it, Yoda.
I get it. Like, I get Yoda, but other than that, where's the story? You know? Anyhow, what's your favorite food, Michelle?
Oh.
I should mix it up. It's really unfair that everyone else gets on more time.
Maybe Thai food. Thai.
Jennifer?
Cheese fries.
Vanilla ice cream. Kind of blasé, but I don't get to eat anything, y'all. I'm training for a fitness competition. that's my cheat meal. That's what I want.
It's amazing. I don't know what my favorite food is.
What?
Chocolate.
You have to answer the rest of it.
I know. I'm going to. I'm just trying to think. Like chocolate, maybe. I don't know. I'll think about that. What is your like go-to drink? We're going to get back around the other way. Scarlett, go first this time.
A grande Americano with an extra shot from Starbucks, which is what I have right here.
Jennifer?
Anything with a ton of sugar in it. So like sweet tea or lemonade or like fruit juice. Anything with sugar.
Michelle?
Coffee. Specifically an Australian flat white.
Ooh. How does that differ from an American flat white?
Well, I just realized when I come to the US that they've never heard of a flat white. So it
sounds like a vlogger or something.
It's basically frothed milk with 2 shots of espresso in it.
But it's like even all the way up. I think that's the important bit, isn't it?
That's right. Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We have it in the UK. I thought it was an American thing, but obviously not.
No.
Mine is tea, different types, English breakfast, Earl Grey, and Lady Grey every day.
Hot or cold?
Was that?
Hot or cold?
Hot.
Can't do it.
Yeah, I'll have to occasionally cold like in the summer, but then more like a fruity, like an orange, blood orange or something like that. Anyway, do you have writing snacks that you always eat when you write, Jennifer?
Gummy bears.
Ooh. Michelle?
No. I try not to snack.
I'm not allowed to snack.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's an unfair question. I don't either. I basically just have to try and keep my kids quiet. I don't have time to get snacks. What is the best holiday vacation location that you have ever been to? Michelle?
Oh, the south of France.
Jennifer?
The best vacation I ever took was when my cousins, we went to Savannah one year. It was 120 in the shade and our car didn't have air conditioning.
That was
the
best.
That was the best. It was so much fun.
Scarlett?
I went on a 3-week vacation to Europe, and we started in France and went to Italy and got on a ship and went around the coast of Greece. It was great.
So nice.
Felt like I came home to another world.
Mine was probably Crete, maybe, or Croatia, possibly.
Croatia's gorgeous.
So nice. Can't think about that when it's freezing cold here right now. What place do you most want to visit, Scarlett?
I want to go on a month-long writing retreat to the Lake District.
Oh, that would be so nice.
I know. Stupid COVID.
Jennifer?
I actually got to go to Frankfurt a couple of years ago for the Frankfurt Book Fair, which was amazing. Ooh. Yes, I definitely want to go back to Germany someday.
Michelle?
I've been for a long time wanting to do a walking tour through Tuscany. So, but obviously that's not going to happen for some time.
Oh, that would be so nice. For me, I really want to see the Northern Lights. It's kind of obsessed. So maybe like a cruise where you can like go and see the Northern Lights at the same time. That would be amazing.
My mom has that on her bucket list.
We can go together. She might not like me. I'm like me anywhere. I'm not like any way to get there. I'm there. Anyhow, Harry Potter or Game of Thrones? Michelle?
Oh, I have to say Harry Potter because at least I liked the characters in Harry Potter.
Jennifer?
I will say Game of Thrones just because I liked all the action and the fight scenes.
Scarlett?
I have not finished Harry Potter and I haven't watched or read Game of Thrones. So as a librarian, I would choose a Game of Thrones just because but
I have to give it Harry Potter just because it's finished. I'm like, I just
Oh, I thought we were talking
fair.
like about the movies and the TV show, and not the books.
Oh, well, I mean either, but either. I mean, and also the end of Game of Thrones. Less said about that, the better. Are you an evening person or a morning person, Scarlett?
I have to be a morning person. That's when I work out. Everything revolves around that.
Michelle?
I'm a morning person, definitely.
And Jennifer?
Morning. I get more writing done in the mornings.
I'm so not. I'm totally the other way. I'm like so not a morning person. I'm an evening all the way. Okay, last one. What's the best piece of writing, publishing, or marketing advice that you have ever been given, or that you have experienced and would like to impart on the world? Jennifer?
I always tell people to have fun with your writing, or as much as you can have fun with the crazy process that it is. Nobody is going to sit down and write your book for you. So you might as well enjoy what you're doing, and don't try to write like a zombie or a vampire book, just because those are popular right now. Write a book that you would want to read.
Scarlett?
I was going to say write what you love because, that's what it's all about.
Michelle?
No one is going to love your book or go to bat for it more than you. So you have to be your best. You are your best marketing / promo person for your book.
Yeah, I think that's been the biggest shock for me. I agree. I'd say something about marketing. If you want to be successful as an author, you really need to realize that's part of it, as well as, if you want to make money from being an author, find out how you can make peace with that part of it as well. Cool. Well, we are pretty much at time. So we'll wrap up. Thank you so much for being part of the panel, and also thank you so much for being part of FaRoFeb. Really appreciate your involvement. Thank you so much to Portsmouth and Rye and Kensington Libraries, and also to Freethinkers Corner in Dover for co-hosting and telling everyone about the event. And yeah, we really hope that you will check out the rest of FaRoFeb. So you can find out about that at www.farofeb.com, and we're also on Instagram at FaRoFeb, FaRoFeb, and you can find us on Facebook as well. And also I would say check out all of our books. They're all brilliant and give you completely different experiences, so there's something for everyone. So yeah, I think Chris has dropped the links in the chat as well, so yeah, we hope you will do that, and always leave a review.
Good review.
Yeah. Don't leave a bad one.
Although Jennifer can take it because she's
she's had some experience.
Oh, you have. I could tell you some horror stories about the newspaper.
I feel like we should have a drink afterwards. Anyhow, Laura, do you want to say anything else before we wrap up?
No, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. I learned so much. I got some good recommendations. It was great.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great evening.